no surprise that cybersecurity has become a top national security priority. And when you consider the great economic risks our country faces that are associated with every cyber attack, you know why. Organizations here in the U.S. experience, on average, 122 successful attacks per week, and that's with all the money we spend trying to prevent them all. More startlingly, the Pentagon must fend off 10 million cyber attacks every day. It's really a yeoman's job trying to fortify our economy and our nation that requires that we first fortify our data. We're honored to have Dr. Phyllis Schneck here to provide keynote remarks on cybersecurity's role in keeping our nation resilient. Phyllis currently serves as Deputy Undersecretary for Cybersecurity and Communications at the Department of Homeland Security. As the department's top cybersecurity official, she plays an instrumental role in strengthening our country's digital infrastructure. Dr. Schneck came to the Department of Homeland Security from McAfee, where she was Chief Technology Officer for the global public sector. She was also Vice President of Research Integration for Secure Computing, founder and Chief Executive Officer of Avalon Computing, and spent 8 years as the National Board Chairman of the FBI's InfraGard program. Phyllis, welcome.
So good afternoon, and I thank you for being here on a dreary afternoon at 3:30 when it's cold out to talk about information sharing. But we will keep this fun, and I'm double honored to be introduced by a man who loves cars. So thank you. It is a real pleasure to be here, to be back among some friends I knew in the private sector. And I thank you first and foremost for taking your day at this, because I know that everybody here has another job, and you'll come back to 1,000 emails, and I really appreciate your doing that, because this is important. This is what energizes us in government, and I've been in government a year and a couple of months now, so I can say that for real. Your partnership and your help is what's going to drive innovation to cut the profit model to what I call the cyber adversary. And the key to that is the partnership. It's the expertise in the private sector, it's the expertise in the partnership, and it's what we're striving for in government, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing at the department. I'm told to talk about 20 minutes and leave 5 for questions. I might speak for 15 and leave 10 for questions if you're willing to ask them. The light back there is really bright, so I'm staring into I don't know what, but I hope I keep you awake. This is core to us. Our secretary considers, and has said this very, very publicly and very often, cybersecurity is part of Homeland Security. And that's a very big message. As we look at the department, I'll start with my role. I'm over cybersecurity and communications within the National Protection and Programs Directorate. There is a quiz at the end of this. Remember those acronyms? But that looks at all of our programs that protect machines and that protect people from the cyber threat, married up very closely with others in the Directorate, with the Office of Infrastructure Protection, with our Office of Biometrics, and our Federal Protective Service, which are the men and women that protect all of our federal buildings all across the country, providing a situational awareness feet on the street. When nothing else blocks it, they see it. And so we're looking at how you marry that up with all of infrastructure protection for situational awareness, all of cyber protection. They know the building maps, they know what goes on in the buildings, and how we understand the overall cyber threat and how that ties into really what's happening overall. So we are about protection, National Protection and Programs Directorate, with cyber interleaved in everything therein. We are not about chasing viruses and worms. We've done a lot of that over 20 years. But this is about keeping the lights on, keeping the food the right way, and keeping our infrastructure, and why you're all here in your different businesses, keeping that on, keeping it running, innovating, and making it better. And I also have charge for our cybersecurity vision across the department, so working with our sister components, the U.S. Secret Service, the U.S. Coast Guard, Emergency Management, and FEMA, Homeland Security Investigations, our Office of the CIO. They run our network. Anyone who runs a network, I got to show you this one. Can you imagine what comes into DHS.gov? We're able to use some of that and digest it the right way. Working very closely, I'll say this for my longtime friend Michelle up here, our Office of Privacy and Civil Liberties, at a time when it is very hard to be an American company and work overseas. We are the civilian agency that's able to do this because it's also a time when it's so urgently necessary to work together. So we are able to work hand in hand with our privacy officers, our civil liberties experts, and put that together in everything we do. That means every piece of code we write, Everything we look at, everything we collect, all of our policies, we publish them on our website. They might put you to sleep, but it's there. And why we do it. So that is ingrained in this civilian department that's charged with the response and mitigation to cyber threat across our civilian government and across private sector. And I say this for my friends to include academia. A lot of people ask about that. So it's all about the education, both protecting them and consuming from education. I heard you had a great lunch talking with a bunch of students on Skype. I'll get to that in a few minutes, how important that is. But really looking at you for partnership, I'll talk about my top 3 priorities. I am a techie. I came from a background of supercomputing and nerddom and crawling around on wires and connecting my machines so that it was the only one running, so I got the best performance. I did that. But from that, my top priority in cybersecurity is trust. I'm building trust with you and between people. This game is about people, and the adversary we see at the end of the day is run by people. And this organized chaos is driven by people. And computers are not smart, they're just fast. They too are programmed by people. So building that trust enables us to learn your expertise in the private sector and put that together with what we can do as government and make sure that we're giving you everything we can, and also putting that together with everything that the private sector can and should be able to be doing if we enable you the right way. And one of the questions I'm going to leave for everybody here is what else can we be doing to better enable that. But in building that trust, we have structured partnership programs, we have stakeholder engagement groups, both in the cybersecurity portion as well as in the infrastructure protection portion, and those people work together. We have groups that get our scientists together, so you sign a big, thick document. The thing weighs just under 5 pounds. Every ounce is worth it. It allows the scientists to get together and look across transcending intellectual property boundaries and talk about what's really happening and getting together and making sure that as an industry we are better protected. And then that we're able to take those tenets and put them across the other sectors. So it's not just about cyber or communications. This is about protecting, again, all that critical infrastructure and everything we are. So being able to tie that together in those partnerships, build that trust, is my top priority. Getting out and talking to people, finding out what they're building, understanding science. Any lawyers in here? All right, so I'm going to say a good thing about lawyers. Lawyers are helping me bring in innovation. Lawyers are helping us say yes when companies want to show us what they're building. Lawyers are helping us have meetings that I think 5 years ago government said, I can't do that. Every week I spend, you can ask my staff, it kills them, but I spend about 4 hours locked in a room with our techies. And I get to roll up my sleeves and shed the title and look at how we're driving our vision. And that gets me to my second priority, situational awareness. Understanding not just how to build a box or build a program, but really leverage everything that we have in networking and computing, and understand that the way the internet was built and the way we built our communications, if you send something, it's going to get there. And when the internet was built, that was considered a really good thing. You know, today when I look at some of the things that are arriving in certain places, I'm not sure I wanted it to arrive there. So as we look at where that traffic passed on all the networks, we need to start building in some understanding of, should I pass this traffic anymore? And how can I warn others that it's coming? You've all heard of see something, say something at the airport. We want see something, say something on the internet. If you see something bad, that should be a warning to everything else on the internet. And the way we build that is innovation in our program. So many of you have heard of our well-publicized Einstein program. And at a very high level, that is intrusion detection and prevention for the .gov, our federal agencies. And I will say that that is, as the press has accused us, old technology if you just look at it as intrusion detection and prevention, with an old technology of saying it's only about stopping things that we've known about for a long time. But if you fast forward to where we are today and working with private sector partners, a quote signature, and this is true in industry as well, is not just something we've seen before. A monkey can do that. It's about understanding behavior, like your body fights a cold, and saying that signature is a set of behaviors that I don't believe is right. And this is where computers can help us, because they are very, very fast. Again, they're not smart. We make them smart by telling them what to recognize very, very fast. Giving them a lot of information, because we've seen protected all those federal agencies over all this time, giving them a sense of what good behavior is and bad behavior is, and combining that with what we can learn from you in the private sector. And not only creating what I call for leadership, eye candy. Any executives in here, don't kill me, but my leadership always wants eye candy. They want to visualize it. I can plot all that for them, but we can also feed it to the machines so that we're not just blocking things we know about, we're able to warn about things we think are wrong. And in DHS language, we like to stop things left of boom. And if something happens right of boom, I want that right of boom to be everybody else's left of boom. So see something, say something. We want to take a lesson from the aviation industry and learn about every event at machine speed. So our protection programs for the .gov are doing two things. One is they are constantly monitoring that traffic behavior and looking at indicators with our privacy experts to understand what we're allowed to watch and what we're not. And we're taking that and we're graphing it and we're understanding all new patterns that go back into the cycle to operationalize that ability to faster recognize something. And then we're doing something even better. We're going to push that back out to government and private sector as data sets. And still working with the lab internally to look at how we do this, but you'll be seeing requests for information in the future. You'll be hearing from us looking for innovative ways to do this, new algorithms, and looking at how we really bring science back to government. That's part of why I came to government. I absolutely adore science. I was raised in it, and I believe this is the right agency to operationalize this because of our use of privacy, because of our civilian posture, because of the trust that we are aiming to build with all the stakeholders across, because the good experiences I was lucky to have with many of you and your colleagues in my past, I believe that our team can do this. I was fortunate to walk into what I think is the best team on earth. We have amazing experts, and I've spent the past year figuring out how to unleash them in different ways. I have a couple here today, John Leslie and Merritt Bear, and you'll meet more in the future. But really looking at how we take that expertise from our 24/7 watch center, our National Communications and Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, NCIC, again, a quiz on the acronyms. Many of you, your companies in here helped stand that up, so thank you. But that is 24/7 central command for when victims tell us they've been hurt, whether it's government or industry, when we detect things, when partners, whether it's the FBI or the intelligence community or the Secret Service or the Coast Guard, sees something out of their SOC, we can then act on that, we can watch it, we can push information back out. We can write a report about it, or we are now working in real time to automate how that information comes out and have one machine send it to another machine in real time. So with a lot of support from, especially on that part, the financial sector and the IT sector and the comm sectors and the energy and many others, really looking at how we push that information out to you. The core is that watch center. That's where our emergency response teams sit, both for general infrastructure as well as what they call control systems. So those systems that control the actual circuits that decide whether the light turns on or the railway works, looking at how we protect not only those systems but the systems that monitor their functionality, all of which our adversary looks as food. So we are really trying to look at not only think like the adversary, but look at how we can beat the adversary. This is our infrastructure. We're going to take it back, and we're bringing science back to the department. And we're innovating on how we build on the programs that my colleagues and past colleagues have worked to build up for the past few years so that we could be here today and be lucky enough to have this. On the partnership side, looking very, very closely at my third priority, which is really leveraging Executive Order 13636, the framework. So how many folks have heard about the cybersecurity framework? So for those who haven't, this is a set of best practices that was crafted by industry, by government, specifically anchored by the National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST. I spent the first 6 months of that year that it was created in private sector, so I can tell you firsthand, and don't laugh too hard, that companies sent their scientists to these meetings. They did not send the people they normally send to DHS meetings. So they sent the really smart people. So that set of best practices looks at how, in a non-prescriptive way, can we lay out a good baseline for what cybersecurity means. And it's not meant as a checklist of compliance. Compliance is not security. Compliance is, did I do these 50 things? And that doesn't last very long. It's an actual outline of what would make you more secure based on risk-consequence decisions. It's something that you can take to the boardroom. And as we were talking earlier with a few folks, it's not about the big companies. Some of those companies and some of your companies have thousands of people working on cybersecurity. You get this. You don't need to admire the problem anymore. It's that small to medium sector, that's 99% of our business fabric, that supplies the rest of the sector with everything, that runs municipal water plants, electric plants, that supplies state and local, that supplies big companies. They don't think they need much cybersecurity. Whether they don't have the budget or they don't recognize it or they simply don't think it's a priority, we are trying to leverage that framework and partnership to bring, whether we have to use the word president or executive order or UNIT or NIST, really trying to make that a risk discussion in the same room where they discuss how to lock the doors and how to store the files. So really trying to have companies understand that this is a risk, because even if you don't think you have much to share or get stolen, such as a famous pizza place in Seattle that was hemorrhaging a couple hundred credit cards every day, you might be the launch pad for someone else. So we need to make sure we protect that sector as well as the state and locals. One of the first things I did when I got to DHS is sit down with our team and figure out how to write a check to provide free managed security services to our state and locals through one of the information sharing and analysis centers, the multi-state one. It's not a permanent solution. It's short-lived as long as we can afford it, but it buys time for those states to use the framework to understand how to budget next cycle for cybersecurity. Also worry a lot about the really small companies. So I brought my boss, Undersecretary Spalding, out west a couple of times to talk to venture capitalists. If you're going to fund $30 million in an A round and you're going to ask your founders to stop flying a light plane, it might be just as good to also look at how you protect the intellectual property you just bought. So really trying to invest in the cybersecurity of those small companies, as well as engage them in making better, smarter, faster, cheaper cybersecurity technologies that put us all at a better posture. So really having the market drive this and having it get locked down. All of that comes from partnership across industry, across academia. One of the first things that I got to do when our new secretary came in was we went down to his alma mater and to mine. So we went to Morehouse and to Georgia Tech, and we talked to graduate students, doctoral students, master's students, and then we even spoke to some college students. One was showing off his Google Glass, and I loved the expression on my leader's face when you saw that. But we asked all of them about cybersecurity, what they were learning, what they were studying, and really encouraged them. And it was surprising to me, and it's affected my messaging since, how little they knew about what the Department of Homeland Security does in cybersecurity, which is our fault. We don't market ourselves. I think that my team, and I am lucky enough to work with people that do amazing work, they don't talk about it. You know, other parts of the world market themselves and don't do the work. So we need to kind of balance that out. But we explained a lot of what DHS does, and we encourage them to, as you shape your career, think about cybersecurity. You don't have to be in government for 50 years, but you can go in and out. You can serve in industry, you can serve in government. What you actually end up doing is bringing skill sets and mixing skill sets. So it solves a lot of problems that I hear about budget, which is fair, and we can't pay the same way, but I think that our mission is equally compelling. We also want to attract the best and brightest talent. I want to make sure that we get people thinking about cybersecurity as not just writing programs or being nerds or fighting ninjas, but really as a field that goes through everything we live and breathe, one that even lawyers can look at, one in which privacy is central. If you think about sharing with government, take a step back and think about everything you're sharing online and social media, right? Think about the balance of what's being collected and be responsible with information and take a lead in that, whether it's a policy or a technical role. So we've been very active in talking to students all over the country. We were down in Louisiana talking to some others. I spoke at a large conference in California, and this one cracked me up. They actually thought I was going to poach their people. There must have been 2,000 people in there. And I thought to myself, you can pay 5 times what I do. So if you're worried about that, good. But we're also really trying to get the talent and bridge the West Coast with the East Coast and not try to have that, really try to defeat that Washington reputation, I guess, that we all have, and go out there. I tried to convince my team not to wear the ties out there. It worked with one of them, not with the other. You know who that was, John? But really looking at sitting down with a lot of, it was not John, it was someone he knows, but sitting down with a lot of companies and really trying to explain that we want to partner. We want to figure out the right way to partner. I am the first one to say that most of the expertise and a lot of the good data is in the private sector. But I believe government offers a couple of very, very unique pictures. You know, one is that we're seeing a lot across a large span that I think helps us target how we can collect better information. The other is that we're fighting very hard to declassify more information. You know, coming into government from the private sector side, there's not a whole lot new. So really trying to, if there's some, but trying to figure out what it is that we can be pushing out better and faster and get through some of the bureaucracy, because, you know, the adversaries don't have bureaucracy. So really trying to work through that and execute with the agility that right now only they enjoy. So I look to groups like this to help us guide our vision, know that we are out there in full force, know that there's not a day of the week that goes by that the cybersecurity heart and soul of Department of Homeland Security is not in touch with the front office and probably 3 or 4 other components on something, and know that everything you read in the media is not true, but also how important this field is. We see every day how easy it is. All the adversary has to do is get into the part of memory on another machine that lets that machine fetch the next instruction. That's all they have to do. And when I say that's all they have to do, you may be saying, I'm a lawyer, I'm a CEO, I don't do that. You can buy it on the internet. So if you really were ill-minded like many of our unsavory adversaries, you'd realize how quickly you can send instructions in to not just steal money or not just send wild amounts of traffic, but do things that we all fear even more on the destructive side. So we work every day to really look at building resilience. We can't prevent it, but what we can do is take their profit model and whack it. We can say that you can send all these bad things in, but like an immune system, we are going to stay up and stay running. We haven't reached that tipping point yet. You will continue to see more and more of these unsavory events. That's for two reasons. One is simply because there are more, and there are more getting reported, which I think is a good thing. The other is you're going to see them increase in sophistication for a bit. And that's because the teams across government and private sector have done a very good job of, in a coordinated way, fighting it. So it's like the antibiotic-resistant strain. The good ones are surviving. And that's a little bit scary, and that's why we work so hard. But it also says we've been effective. So I think we're at a very critical point where partnership is very, very important. So that's why I'm here today, and that's why I very, very much thank you sincerely for all of your support. And I would offer, the strength of our part of the department to do whatever we can to support you back. And I'll take some questions for the adversaries. It's everybody, and I know that that's not the targeted answer you want to hear or quote, but this stuff comes in all shapes and sizes. You still have, quote, just the people that want financial gain on the underground. And you also, as we saw in Shamoon a couple of years ago, you also have folks that are ready, aim, fire for destructive malware. So everybody's intent is different. What we are seeing, and you can see, and this has been in the press, and some of the black energy malware is for one of the first times it's fairly obvious that some of them, we've known this, so in the private sector. I just think it's more clear now that some of the tools that the adversary has been using for, say, on the criminal side, are also being extended for use on the more destructive side. So you start to see a melding of a tool set where it's more choose your own use for it, whereas I think before there were some distinguished, where people determined that or distinguished that as different groups and different purposes. I think you're seeing it come together because it's very easy now to find very sophisticated tools to do very nasty stuff, and people are using it for all kinds of, there are all kinds of targets, whether it's money, whether it's simple noise and abuse, which is how I categorize DDoS, or it's worse, right? And so we worry about all of those because to me, it all fits into someone else is executing their will on something you own, right? On the part of, sort of when you want to know who, I don't really look at this as they're a top set because DHS's mission is response and mitigation. So the joke back home at the department is clean up on aisle 9 when we see one of these. But it's more keeping somebody running, make sure they do mitigation the right way so that they can maintain resilience. And for us, we leave the job of attribution to the FBI and the Secret Service and Homeland Security investigations. But our part, this is a very important message, is to maintain the resilience. It is not to go out in a law enforcement function. That's part of maintaining that trust, right? Our partners do that, and we work in concert, I think, very well that way.
Do you have any notion of how much might be out there that we don't know about?
I believe that everybody is potentially owned. In fact, I'll go further. I believe everybody either has been owned at one time or is owned now, meaning you have a visitor. So when you look into the question before, how do you sort of do cybersecurity, you look at it as a risk equation. This is what we would ask people to do. As part of your risk, how do you look at protecting your assets? To whom are you responsible? Are you part of the supply chain to someone else? And how much risk is there if someone owned either access to your networks, to your emails, to your intellectual property, or on another spectrum, access to the systems that control physical infrastructure, or those that monitor physical infrastructure? Sometimes I don't think people realize how much those things have converged and how necessary it is to look at cybersecurity as part of a risk equation. I don't know if you've all heard of the Metcalf event. I'm out of time. I'm going to give you 30 seconds on this. There was a bright orange circle out in California down on the concrete that showed where the fiber was that led to the monitoring systems to protect the systems on an electric plant. A bunch of people came in and they found the orange circle and they said, oh, there it is, and they cut the cable. So now you've got no monitoring. They didn't even need to send in malware for that. So everybody that saw those systems run did not see any difference in what they were sort of monitoring and how the systems were running because no changes were sent through that cable. It was severed. And during that time, some people drove up with rifles and shot at the substation, taking out some of the cooling systems for the transformers. And that was out in Silicon Valley, I think 2 Aprils ago. And we were very lucky that they didn't get everything because the plant stayed up and running. Otherwise, Silicon Valley would have gone dark for a little while. So if you look at, number one, was it a physical or cyber threat? My answer in the department was, who cares, right? You have to keep them up and running. We have to figure that out after. Number two, I think we have to be more careful on where we identify where our assets are. And number three, do the risk equations of where the monitoring systems are, what part of that could have been done cyber-wise. So somebody saw somebody go cut a cable potentially. Would have been easier to do it from your bedroom in your slippers. So how do we look at the assets that we have in a world where that is happening and protect those? And how do you use your money to do it? I'm not saying lock everything down. I'm saying assuming you have a visitor, where do you protect it in the best way? And we can help you with that. We have, as part of the framework, critical infrastructure resilience reviews. We can come in and help you. We do not ask you to report your results. We can just give you everything we would use to assess, and you can use that as a baseline. So, got it? Okay, they're telling me to go away, so I'm happy to. But thank you very much.
So I do have to say, because we were feeling a little sheepish about a lot of airtime, but the panel preceding lunch today was actually an outcome of our both happen to being here as trustees, Bill Goodwin and myself, and we already had a participation in this group, and then we were fighting with our teams to find a good date where we were in the same country with each other. So there was a chicken and there was an egg, and I think it actually gave birth to a really good dinner. I don't know if that's a good thing. But anyway, I'm really pleased to include cybersecurity and privacy as Dr. Schneck so thankfully married them together on this panel, and I think you're going to really love hearing from a really interesting and diverse background. And I am going to read their full backgrounds because I think one of the lessons learned in the takeaway, and I think it goes to Steve's question also, is what can we do, how do we prioritize, and what are the talents necessary? So I'll give you some backgrounds of these wonderful panelists. Mary Galligan is our first panelist up on deck. She's the Director of Cyber Risk Services at Deloitte Touche. Mary advises senior executives on crisis management challenges they may face, in particular cyber risks. She helps clients develop and execute security programs to prevent and minimize business impact of cyber threats. Mary joined Deloitte after retiring in 2013. I never believe people anymore when they say retiring. It's always a second act. From a distinguished career with the Federal Bureau of Investigations, Mary oversaw all FBI investigations into national security and criminal cyber intrusions in New York City and advised numerous financial institutions, media entities, and law firms during their high-pressure situations. Her most recent position was with the New York office as the special agent in charge of cyber and special ops, where she led the largest technical and physical surveillance operation in the FBI. She gained significant crisis management experience as a supervisor over the FBI's investigation into the terrorist attacks on 9/11, as one of the on-the-scene commanders in Yemen after the bombing of the USS Cole, and as special agent in charge of special events and SWAT in New York City. Can we please welcome Mary to the panel? I told you these backgrounds are really intimidating. Thank you and welcome. So next we have Lisa Hook, who is the president and CEO of NeuStar. One of my great friends is your CPO. I love her. Give her a raise. And a member of the President's National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee at DHS. Lisa has served as Chief Executive Officer since October 2010 and as a Director of NeuStar since November of 2010, and as President since joining NeuStar in January of 2008. Prior to joining NeuStar, Lisa was president and CEO of SunRocket Incorporated. She's also held several executive-level posts at America Online Incorporated, including president of AOL Broadband, Premium and Developer Services, president AOL Anywhere, and senior vice president and chief operating officer, AOL Mobile. Talk about a leader in our field. After leaving America Online in 2004, Lisa served on various corporate boards Lisa also served in executive and special advisory roles at Time Warner Inc., was legal advisor to the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, and was a senior attorney at Viacom International. Please welcome Lisa. I can't see anyone. Oh, good. I haven't seen Lisa to say hello yet, so I'm really glad you're here after all that. For a little diversity, we have a man on our panel. We let them in every now and again. We have to do it. Dave McCann is Vice President and Chief Security Officer at CenturyLink Incorporated. Dave is responsible for information security, critical infrastructure protection, physical security, network fraud and abuse, industrial security, international travel security, global intelligence, workplace violence prevention, executive protection, investigations, national security telecommunications advisory council, National Coordinating Center for Telecommunications, and liaison with federal and state law enforcement and Homeland Security agencies. From August 2006 until March 2011, Dave was the Vice President of Corporate Security for Quest Communications and responsible for similar corporate security programs that he's currently responsible for at CenturyLink. Prior to his corporate security positions, Dave was a supervisory special agent also with the FBI. We've got a little reunion going on. And responsible for investigating violations of federal statutes in which the internet, computer systems, and networks were exploited as the targets of terrorist organizations, foreign government-sponsored intelligence operations, or criminal activities. During his 31 years with the FBI, he also managed programs related to white-collar crime, crisis management, critical infrastructure protection, and violent crime. Welcome, Dave. Okay, last but certainly not least is General Suzanne Zan. I'm gonna butcher your last name. Vautrinot. I'll give it the French spin, is a director at Symantec and at ECOLAB. Zan is a highly decorated General Suzanne, hello. Award-winning retired Major General of the U.S. Air Force. My husband is an Air Force alum, so thank you for your service. With a career influencing the development and application of cybersecurity and space technology, Zan has led large-scale global organizations that operate and defend global networks. Throughout her 3-decade military service, Zan held many key assignments, including cyber operations, plans and policy, strategic security, space operations, and acquisitions. On multiple occasions, she was selected by military leaders and White House officials to spearhead high-profile engagements and received a number of prestigious awards, including the National Defense Citations, the Symantec Cyber Award, Women in Aerospace Leadership Award, and the Presidential Award for Training, to name a few. As a cyber subject matter expert, she sought out to advise key task forces and testify before Congress. She has served as Deputy Commander for DoD's network warfare and as a key architect in establishment of the nation's critical cyber capabilities and structure. Zan led an interagency task force and established collaborative partnerships with DoD, state and treasury, law enforcement, intelligence agencies, and international partners. She served as an advisor to defense and national security staff and Congress on developing cyber policy, international standards, rules of engagement. Zan's International Cyber Engagement Plan was approved and implemented by the Department of Defense. So let's welcome, I got one last thing. Sorry, I missed the last paragraph. Most recently, Zan served as commander of Air Force's Cyber, where she oversaw a multi-billion-dollar global cyber enterprise with 14,000 military, civilian, and contractors. General Zan, please. So I promise you that I am going to leave the starlight where it belongs, but I did want to be a little extensive with their backgrounds to highlight the complexity and the depth of talent that we have serving our nation and serving our private sector as well. And that's really the theme of what we want to talk about. As Dr. Schneck highlighted, the government is here to help. And we, in the private sector, I think sometimes have a confusing and hard time keeping up with that request and requesting the right things back. And so that's what we'd like to kind of unpeel in this session. So I'm going to kick you off and then I'll sit down, which is, let's start off with really what do we mean by cyber threats and what does it mean to this population and community? Just dive right in.
So coming from the military, cyber threat meant national security. It meant that someone was inside our network systems, either to take our intelligence so that they could thwart or defeat our systems, or so that they could stop our ability to do operations, whether that's moving troops in the ability that Transportation Command has to actually get folks to the point that's necessary, whether you're doing humanitarian or whether you're doing military operations. It meant stopping our ability to do anything. And as I moved into the private sector, what it meant is stopping your abilities to succeed in business and to succeed in your strategy for that business. So it is the same problem, but it's basically using your assets, your communications and network systems against you. And anyone that tries to do that for whatever purpose is the bad guy.
Excellent.
Can I add one thing
Yeah.
to that? Because I think it is, in fact, as you said, using your assets and your systems against you, but equally it's using your people against you. And so we were talking a bit about this beforehand. You can have phenomenal systems, you can have phenomenal processes and governance, but unless you get down to individual people within your organizations and sensitize them to the risks of, something as simple as clicking on that link, all of your millions of dollars of protection really go for naught.
Lisa, I agree. There's even a show, You Are the Weakest Link. And they are, people are.
So any more thoughts about our basic definitions? What do we mean by cyber threat? What is kind of the scope of protection and threats?
I think depending upon who you are as a company and what your assets are, that begins to define who your threat is. And I think what's happened when you look at companies globally or small companies locally, they don't really understand a threat, and then therefore the leadership of the organization, small or large, does not understand they need a cybersecurity strategy. So I think one of the things you want to understand is really what is the threat. And if you think about it, Dr. Schneck alluded to it or stated a number of times, she said it's an adversary of some type. But when you speak with executives in a corporation or young startups, that's something that they still can't get their arms around, at least not enough to put dollars to solve the problem. So one of the things you have to understand about the threat is who you are as a company. What are your assets, what do you do for a living, and how can someone want to hurt you and for what reason? So if you're a company, for example, like we saw back in May of 2014, Department of Justice indicted 5 military Chinese officers for hitting U.S. Steel, Westinghouse, and other companies. What was interesting was they went at them for various reasons. Some of those companies were hit because they had intellectual property that the Chinese wanted. Others had trade negotiations underway and they wanted their strategy. And a third was into a dispute and some other type of litigation. So when you do your assessment as to what is the threat, you have to understand who you are first. You take the target breach, and people think about these criminals that come out and steal your credit cards. Really the analogy that I would use, don't be thinking of that small organization or group somewhere. Think more about a drug organization, an organization that can grow the drug in South America, process it, transport it, monetize it in the U.S. That's the nature of the threat you're dealing with, and depending upon what you have as an asset, your threat can be external or it can be internal. If you look at the next generation of employees or some of our current employees, some of the studies show that 47% of your data breaches are internal. So just think about what your assets are and then think about the type of threats that are out there, and I think that's how you decide how to address issues.
Yeah, that's great. Mary, do you have anything to add?
Everything everybody said is exactly what the threat is about. Another way for businesses to think about it is, what do you need to function? So sometimes the cyber threat becomes overwhelming from a business perspective of what you should be protecting. So not only, as everyone said, what do you have that someone else wants, but when it really gets down to it, what is it that you need to do to function? What technology supports your functionality? And that is what the most significant threat would be to your company.
Yeah, I think these are great points, and to tie it back to some of the missions of CED as well, is we talk about financial debt planning and asset management from a financial and a currency perspective. It seems to me, from everything I'm hearing from you guys, that data is a currency that we should be looking at as strategically as we are our normal currency dollars internationally. So let's move on from there and kind of key off of what Phyllis said earlier, which is we've learned a bit from the public sector and what they're seeing at a very wide and horizontal view. What lessons have been learned from the the private sector? And everyone here has had a lot of extensive experience on both sides of the table, so I'm really interested in both what is your perspective as private sector players, as well as what have you learned being a bit of both?
So, from a corporate point of view, I would say we look at it from two perspectives. How do we protect ourselves internally with respect to our data assets? And at this point, I would say that for every company, whether public or private, cybersecurity, well, actually security, both physical but as well cyber, should be either number one or number two in your enterprise risk management structure. I mean, no question about it, this is a board level issue and should be addressed at least once a year by the full board, so that you've got that level of sensitivity. And that's really kind of where we start. And then as well, we provide several security services to companies, and it's actually quite interesting. It's not just smaller companies. We find in many sectors that are not aware of their cybersecurity risks, but larger companies as well. And many times, as we're briefing CIOs, the initial response we get is, please leave my office and never come back again. I just don't want to know, and if I don't know, it's not going to hurt me. So I'd say that we actually, I think in telecoms that's not true. People in telecommunications industry have been on the cutting edge of cybersecurity issues, financial services similarly, but there are a number of sectors where even very senior executives are still frozen to the point of not wanting to be aware, and we all have to work together to change that so that every industry is equally aware. We're all connected to the net at this point, and so we're all points of vulnerability.
Yeah, anything to add? Private, public sector lessons learned?
So the similarity is probably what surprised me the most. And the first part was that it is so much a shared threat. There are few things in either government or in business where all of us share the same exact problem, certainly in a different way, in terms of what kinds of things you're trying to protect, but the fact that you're all vulnerable equally. And so in government, we saw that drive a collaboration that was very different from a lot of other things. So you mentioned in the introduction, there's a thing called the Joint Interagency Task Force. We like it, the JIATF. We like to name everything in acronyms. And what that meant is all the military services, all of the major commands around the globe, FBI, Secret Service, the entire Department of Treasury, and the OFEC side, which was just phenomenal, all of the three-letter agencies that we're so fond of, and some foreign players that were truly friends. And in that conversation, it was one of the few times where you didn't see ownership of the responsibility, who's in charge, being the first conversation. The first conversation was, what do we know and what of each of us can bring to bear to help be part of the solution? And when that starts to be the conversation, you're in a much better place. The second part about the conversation is conversation isn't communication. Right. So we're dealing with an area, cyber, where immediately, I think Lisa said this as well as David, the eyes roll back in everybody's heads. You say cybersecurity and everybody says, oh my God, they're going to talk about that again. And the technologists will use great shorthand. And as soon as you say DNS, IPv6, I think I'll throw in a little of USB and don't worry about that. Everyone stops communicating. They're still having a conversation, but they are not communicating in the least. So it's a conversation that needs to be held without the jargon and without some of the acronyms that we like to use in government, which sometimes aren't helpful. So if the Cyber Information Sharing and Collaboration Program that DHS has is going to be effective, you can't call it by the letters.
Right.
You have to use the full name, and you have to understand that it's about all of the information we have about what happened, and then how do we collaborate on the solution to either prevent it the next time or deal with it this time. Those are two things that are tough.
Yeah, great, thank you. Mary?
Zan said something about one of the biggest similarities. I'll say something about one of the biggest differences that David and I was talking about before, is that we just assumed leading the FBI that everybody in corporate America understood the government's role in this threat. And it is truly, as Zan just said, a threat that businesses need to really understand what the government's role is, both limitations as well as expertise they can bring, because nobody can see the entire threat. So the government can see some things that the private sector can't see. The private sector can see some things the government can't see. A very simple way to say it. And something to keep in mind as you sit there as a business leader is this. When I was in the New York office of the FBI, it was 40% of the time. A lot of the security reports you see now put it around a third of the time. You're going to hear about the breach from outside your organization. So you're going to hear about it from the Secret Service or the FBI or DHS or a vendor or a customer. And when that happens to you as a business, you've just been told about something that you probably should have known about, you didn't know about it, and you're going to be joining a baseball game at the bottom of the ninth inning. So understanding that is different than a lot of the enterprise risk threats that we just talked about that you control within your company. So I think it's very important for people to understand that's why everybody talks about information sharing. From a business perspective, I will also say we don't have a lot of protections for corporations in sharing. There's still a lot of regulation, a lot of fines, a lot of negative, but we need to figure out a way of how to do that information sharing for all of us to be safer, both on the corporate as well as the government side. If I could just comment on the information sharing point, I think that that's exactly right. I think there are a couple things with respect to private industry sharing data with the government. Are we protected? Where else is that data going? What are the other uses for the data? And I would say just in the marketplace with respect to brand protections these days, the Edward Snowden events have had just a huge dampening effect, I think, on many companies' willingness to share.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, do you want to add on some lessons learned?
Yeah, I think the bigger difference between the corporate side and the government side really is an understanding of risk. When you're in the government, whether it's the FBI, the Secret Service, or Homeland Security, from day one, you're taught about risk, security, that the data cannot get out there. It can compromise a counterintelligence or a counterterrorism operation. So it's part of your DNA from day one. When you get over onto the corporate side, the conversation is very different when they talk about risk. You know, they're talking about earnings volatility, and they're talking about stock price, and they're talking about competition. And when you look at the business processes in the corporate world, what does that really mean as they're launching their next business case? They don't think about the risk associated with the cyber risks. They don't marry them up. And so if you look at the bell curve on, you know, the expected earnings on a particular engagement you might have, it doesn't factor in if that new technology is breached and that intellectual property is taken. And so I think that's the bigger difference. They don't do risk assessments within the context of the threat, where in the government they always were face-to-face with the threat. They arrested the Chinese, they arrested the bank robber, and they met them and they knew them and they understand them. When you get to the corporate world, you're talking about somebody they've never met, has never hurt them in any way that they know of, and as a result, it's very difficult to put financial resources, you know, behind mitigation of something that you're not, you know, is it smoke and mirrors sometimes, I think they're worried about.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's not very tangible necessarily as risk, and in fact, I'll add a finer point on it. I think the incentive within corporate America is to share It's not to classify and to withhold. You're supposed to be out there. My PR people are constantly have me on the run, getting awareness for what it is we do and breaking through the noise of the vast communication systems to share. So I want to pose a question to you that we didn't talk about in the prep call, so this is a pop quiz. But it strikes me as I've been listening, in the Industrial Revolution, one of the things most revolutionary was really the dual book accounting system. And what I'm hearing from you guys talking about understanding the risk and calculating the risk and talking about this from a business perspective and a management perspective is although your risks may vary to your type and degree, at the end of the day, every voice is saying the same thing. You need to recognize it, assess it, manage it, and leverage it. That sounds a lot like currency control and dual book accounting to me. So where is that consistent communication of risk? Where is that accountancy in data and assets? And I don't think there is an answer to this, so I just throw it out there as just kind of a burning question.
Well, again, for us, we just deal with it as part of our enterprise risk, although I'm hearing we should step it up a bit. And I do think it's a language issue. When you talk in the terminology, people just turn off. So I think it's getting to the point where we're able to define the risk very clearly, and it has to be addressed at the board level, at the audit committee, and then at the full board. So it has to flow up. I think every company needs to spend more time talking about it. But of course, most people are going to say, I've got $50 million. How much of that am I going to invest in security? How much of that am I going to invest in my capital plant for commercial purposes? So that there will always be, I think, a very different trade-off in industry than there is in government.
Yeah, and I think if I could have my wish list, I would say as a privacy professional, your risk of not sharing and not getting on mobile and not being global is as dire as your risk of not protecting your assets. So that's your balance and counterbalance. I think it's a really interesting way to dig through the problem.
So
go ahead,
let me
please.
add a couple of good news stories.
Oh, good. We need good news.
In working with three very different companies, so Symantec, ECOLAB, and Parsons, which is a design, engineering, construction firm. In Symantec, their core competency is cybersecurity.
Yep.
And you would think that the risk assessment would be about the technologies they're developing and the products and those kinds of things. But when they think about risk and corporate, it is a big discussion about not just the things that they provide as services and products, but how do their customers use those things? Mm-hmm. And so what they send forward, very similar to what you've seen in Intel, what they send forward is part of the reputational risk of the company, because how your consumer uses it is part of your corporate environment, your corporate risk. In ECOLAB, which is research and development, distribution, manufacturing, worldwide, sanitization, and it covers the gambit of all kinds of different companies that depend on this for food and beverage, for institutional, for oil and gas. When they look at the couple of thousand people they have doing R&D, and they look at how important those patents are, then they marry that against, now wait a minute, when we provide that capability to all these corporations as a partner, it's the way that we service and the way that we provide the expertise, not the data itself, not the intellectual property itself. It's the whole mechanic of the system. And so they think about cyber risk and cybersecurity from that standpoint. Then you go to Parsons, which is design and engineering, which nobody looked at the industrial control systems and the SCADA and the automation that can be hacked to great disadvantage. And so what they've done is acquire cybersecurity firms, Secure Mission Solutions and Sparta, and they are building that into the fabric of the company for how they do design and engineering for industrial control, because the risk is that as they do the design, the responsibility is also there for the operation of that airport or that bridge. So when I talk to boards, I'm talking to people that are going through the standard process that they look at for risk, whether it was safety or whether it was any other aspect of their operation, but they're looking at cybersecurity from the standpoint of what's core to their responsibility. Not that they have to spend all their dollars on doing that thing, but how do they incorporate it into the fabric of the company? And so very different, but really good news to somebody from the outside
Very good
looking in.
news, actually, because you're not building this up sua sponte. You're actually keying off of assets they have. I love
Exactly.
that. Lisa, you,
If I
and
could
Mary
just-
too.
I'm sorry.
No, I was just to build on that, and I think it's very important, going back to Michelle's point, is the world is going to be more mobile. Technology is going to even be more and more prolific. So we do have to balance this. And I think what you're seeing a switch in business from, 10 to 12 years ago, we started to secure everything. We started to build all the firewalls, build all the protections. And now you start to see a shift where, okay, how can we be a little bit more vigilant about the things that we really have to protect? How can I get cyber threat intelligence information that's specific to me and what I have to protect? And I have more of we talk to businesses all the time about having a patchwork quilts approach as opposed to a blanket approach when it comes to cybersecurity. So Michelle may be in part of the company where she needs to connect with everybody on the outside.
Feels that way.
Okay, and wherever your PR people are, I'm giving you a thumbs up here, right? So she's going to have maybe not the kinds of controls on her that I may have in a different part of the company. However, it gets down to access management. We're not going to let Michelle have access through her devices to these very sensitive things. So you start to see, when you talk about enterprise risk, and what companies are doing now is taking that step back and looking at it as a patchwork quilt. So you mentioned something about spear phishing, which, as everybody knows here, that's when you get an email and you click on the link and you've infected your system. Very, very effective for the adversary and cheap and easy. Very difficult to protect against, because I send you the email, I'm already inside your network. I don't have to come through your firewall or your VPN. Well, if you look at the patchwork quilt solution, you're starting to see companies in the financial services, defense contractors saying, well, maybe certain people in our company, our network administrators, are not going to be allowed to click on links. Or maybe our CFO, so again, I think the good news story is you're starting to see, how do we get business done, how do we communicate, and then protect the assets that we have to protect. I don't know if you're seeing that.
Absolutely. I was just going to say, the way it's happening right now, as you know, is people send an email to me, and then I forward it to somebody, right? And so the poor guy in the law department will always click on something that I've sent him. So lawyers, don't click. That's my only practical advice. I just want to go back to something that Zan said that we've actually instituted a couple of years ago, and I think can be useful for many companies, particularly those in big data businesses. So when we go off to design new services or new products, we, at the very beginning of the day, have instituted both privacy by design and security by design. We were talking before the panel, it's very difficult to go back and re-engineer services that were never engineered for security. We all have a patchwork system. We try to do our best. But moving forward, particularly now that we have the NIST framework, which amazingly has been agreed on by everyone, we're really looking at designing again into a cyber secure environment. And I think if we can proselytize that more so that everyone going forward is designing against cybersecurity framework, that would be just a tremendous advance for the country.
I think that's really good. And so the privacy by design NIST is still a little tiny baby kind of on its side, but we're working hard on that one too. And yet another shameless, if you haven't picked up a copy of our book, The Privacy Engineering Manifesto, it's a book I wrote with my dad actually, and it's about how to build private and secure organizations, recognizing the policies that have been working since the 1960s and before, and then applying basic engineering techniques, data modeling and threat detection, adding the fair information principles, baking respect for human data back into those things. So, and it's open source, so anyone can get it for free in a digital format from on your Nook, on your Kindle, or on apress.com. So that was important too. It's not a brand thing, it's a Dad and Michelle thing. But it's really interesting, and I'm going to direct this question back of the other edge, I think, in private practice, and this is again that kind of edge of public-private, is who is your public? For us, we're global. We sell billions of dollars with a B to the Chinese nationals. And if you ask who the adversary is from some of our protective details, they'll tell you it's coming out of the Eastern Bloc countries, it's coming out of China. It really is coming out of everywhere. But at the same time, these are our customers. So how are we balancing our need to be global entities with a real threat of, to our nations and our nation states and our jobs in our purview? So who are nations when we're talking about working with public sector? Who's public? And what are your thoughts about how do we make this balance actually happen for us so that we can still have these healthy organizations?
David, you have...
Just a small challenge for you, Dave.
Well, when I think of private-public partnerships, from our perspective at CenturyLink, I think of them within the context of the United States government and state governments. That's how we view them, because we're a critical infrastructure. We have over 500,000 square miles of the backbone around the world. And as a result, a lot of the traffic of your Fortune 500 customers to your residential neighborhoods to, just a whole host of small startups right on there. And so we work very closely with the federal government, but we look at it really within three areas: policy, planning, and operations. From a policy perspective, where we spend some of our time is with the NSTAC, where it gives us an opportunity to listen to the government. What are their concerns? What would they like us to study from a commercial perspective for them? And come back maybe with a policy recommendation on what we think would be helpful to the federal government. When we think about planning, the government has many, it was born in the disaster recovery, business continuity, the physical world of how do you restore things after a 9/11 or a Katrina, and now we're moving into the cyber world. So from that perspective, we work closely with the federal government partners to talk about what really is the national infrastructure protection planning process here. Mm-hmm. And if you were to read that plan, there's 8 or 9 annexes. We help author the telecommunications restoration. So we feel that that's a partnership relationship with them. And then finally on operations, when you look at a lot of the tabletop exercises or field exercises by FEMA or DHS and other areas, we try and join those exercises and meet them at the crisis management table during the exercises. So when something really does happen, they understand our capabilities, we understand their equities, and we're able to effectively communicate through a crisis. You don't want to be in a crisis like a Katrina or 9/11 and for the first time begin to realize exactly how FEMA works. So we spend a lot of time with them, and they understand for us the types of things. That has now progressed to cyber. We understand in advance possibly when there will be large-scale DOS attacks. We work...
Denial of service.
Denial of service attacks. We know how to pick off these bots off our network to minimize what the bad actors can do with bots.
The computer's automatically doing things, even though you don't know if your computer's doing something, it's actively engaging in the network without your awareness, and so that creates a lot of noise on the net, and if it's controlled.
Right. So some of you, if not a majority of you, computers have probably been compromised. And when you read about the DOS attacks somewhere in the near future, your machine could have been used as part of that computing power. So keep that in mind, and then keep in mind in about the next 4 years, the number of internet connections will quadruple at a minimum. That means your refrigerator is going to be part of the DOS attack because your refrigerator is going to connect to the internet. That computerized system can be compromised, and within that it can be used as computing power. It's a very interesting engagement that we have with the government when we talk about these issues.
Yeah, a statistic I heard was that this device has more information capability than President Clinton ever had during his entire administration. That's pretty impressive stuff.
So I think the thing that David made very, very clear is that there are partnerships for how you work together and collaborations across government and in the private sector. It's probably important to note that there is an equal partnership on the negative side. And so if you try to separate criminal behavior from hacker behavior, from nation-state behavior, from rogue entity, it's probably unwise, because just as we saw in the drug, terrorism, financial laundering of money, there are partnerships on the negative side. And so whether it is a question of who has established that partnership and for what intent, recognizing that it is a partnership. And so if you're watching the dynamics that allowed them to be effective and you're using your partnership for good in order to thwart that activity or to watch it very carefully and perhaps let the FBI or one of the other great three-letter agencies help you follow them home, then you have not only breached the organization that touched you, but also their partnerships that helped them create the dynamic and create the capability. And so this is part of what cybersecurity firms do, is they watch this behavior in the wild, in the World Wide Web, and they help to articulate what is normal behavior and what is unusual and what is intended for good and for ill. And then the information sharing is not a single attack, but a behavior or a set of behaviors. And it's that sharing of the dynamic that is the web that's helpful on both sides. So taking advantage of the fact that they have to phone a friend as well is probably not such a bad thing.
Right, that's true. And Mary, I'm sure a lot of your clients are global as well. How are they balancing the need to have this partnership to leverage and rely on the infrastructure of protection that we do have, but also realize, I also act as an attorney as part of my duties. My customers are asking me to keep things on-prem or in a certain jurisdiction, and that's 163 jurisdictions. So they're asking me to guarantee that. They're asking me to guarantee that I'm not sharing metadata with governments around the world. So how are we balancing with that real business reality of sign or don't sign with the need to have this protective layer? And I'm sure you're seeing this from all your customers as well.
Right. And you add to that wherever you are in the world is going to have their own privacy laws. So protecting the data as well as following the privacy laws are going to be different in Europe than they are going to be in the United States. So you do see, getting back to, we keep talking about the enterprise risk, but we started this conversation, this last part, about that public-private and how do you accept the risk. Doing business around the globe comes with risk. And so if you're going to open an oil field in a certain part of Africa, you're going to look at, as David said, what is the risk of a terrorist threat? What is the risk of a pandemic? What is the risk of, when you look at all of these geographical risks. Same thing if you're going to do something in any other part of the world. So the same thing comes with cybersecurity. It's okay to do business anywhere around the globe, recognizing our connections from point A to point B more risky than point B to point C. And I think what you see a lot of businesses are doing now in the United States, on the large, I'm talking about the largest scale global businesses, is yes, they're segmenting to some degree, where you communicate within your company, country to country, certain times of the week. It's always encrypted. It's the newest encryption information. And they're doing a better job about what they communicate. Not all information needs to be global. And then David said something that I think is also you're seeing more and more of, especially with recent regulation that's come out in the United States, or actually some of the SEC alerts that have been coming out. The cybersecurity issue is here, the threat is here, the risk is here. So if you just look at the last 12 months, you're seeing the shift about how well I can respond to an incident, something that all of us in the government, like you say, from day one, we're taught how to respond to the incident, is going to make me better in the marketplace. So recognizing I've got the risk, they're probably in my system, something is going to happen, how can I respond? So the recent financial services breach they deserve a lot of credit for finding that sooner than a year ago we were seeing people find things, stopping it before money and financial information was stolen. So you're seeing a lot more of companies now doing these cyber simulations, these practicing from not the technical side, but the technical and the business side. So when you look at that global picture, you ask the business units, if this technical issue happens, if this cyber breach happens, what decisions are you going to make? What are we going to shut down? What are we going to concentrate on? So I think you're going to see that as another trend, is the acceptance that it's going to happen, just like hurricanes are going to happen. just like, all kinds of different disasters are going to happen. And how resilient can I be, and how quickly can I respond, contain, and get back to function?
Yeah, and I love that you brought it back down to people and decision-making. If we really take apart what happened at Target, the technology worked like a dream. The signal was sent. They didn't know how to receive it and balance it against the fact that it was Black Friday, and it was time to sell. And we saw the result was pretty devastating on the business as well as on the cyber integrity of that company, and that brand took some hits too.
I'd say that there's something else that particularly the small and medium might want to consider. The things that make it most successful on the World Wide Web is having a vast resource of data. Same thing with government. You have visibility to something that's going on worldwide as opposed to within a small company. So sometimes you don't want to build up a core competency within your own business to try to do this kind of activity. Sometimes it is much better, much more efficient to go find someone that has that core competency as their business and leverage them through services, subscriptions. And what you're finding is a change in those that provide it for cybersecurity. They're no longer trying to just sell you products that then you have to figure out how to use and become brilliant in. There is I think the term is convergence in both government and in the private sector, but it is a recognition that it is a capability and an intellectual capacity merged with technologies, both physical and software, and with a repeated collaboration of your environment so that you don't have to build it on your own, and you can get enough for just the things that, as David said, you've defined as risk for your company, as opposed to trying to build your own cybersecurity core competency in a business that's just not your primary concern. So,
Yeah, I think one of the things you want to do, particularly if you're a small to medium-sized company, is ask yourself, do I really even need my own IT department? Think about it. Maybe a lot of people here are a little bit younger than me, but I used to be able to change the oil in my car. I can't do that anymore because when I open up the hood, I don't even know what I'm looking at. So what's happened is, particularly if you're a small, mid-sized company, cybersecurity, it's got an unemployment rate of 0. It's very hard to find the people. You're facing aggressive, talented adversaries. So ask yourself as a leader within your business whether you even need an IT department or whether I can get more services faster, cheaper, and smarter. Because if you really take a look at the Target breach that you were discussing, that breach of Target was actually done through Fazio Mechanical in Pittsburgh, their HVAC vendor. So think about that for a minute. Part of what you're going to see if you are a small to mid-sized company and you want to be a vendor to a large corporation, if a large corporation is doing their job, they're going to do a risk assessment on you because you're only going to be as strong as your weakest link. And basically, the bad actors got into Target through their HVAC vendor out of Pittsburgh. And if that doesn't kind of alert small vendors as to how you can lose your business, because I question whether there's going to be any renewal of a contract with Fazio Mechanical. Seeing as how Target's replaced some of its executives. So just take a look at what I call managed security services. You may actually get a lot more for your money.
You made a comment before about the analogy to accounting, right? There is a point where small and medium-sized companies, they're not going to do their own auditing, they're not going to do their own books, they're not going to do their own legal work, they're not going to have their own legal department. You see cybersecurity going that way, between frameworks and regulation and you hit the nail on the head. There is no talent. It's another thing we need to do as public-private partnership is how do we encourage those that are coming through school now to become that talent pool and make us strong, and how can business support that? So even if you wanted to have your own top-notch IT program in a small department in a small company, finding the talent is going to be probably the most impossible job. So I think you go out for expertise in a lot of other things, it's becoming one of those areas.
So I think we've got about 2 minutes left of time. Just a quick wrap up from each of you. What should we expect? What can we do? Whatever you think is the strongest takeaway for this group. I think this is a conversation that could go on for a while.
So Two really quick things. The first one is don't treat the victim as the guilty party. This is an adversary, and it comes from external. It is criminal behavior. And if we treat corporations who have been attacked as though they are somehow the guilty party, that's unwise. The other part is corporations need to understand this isn't just about technology. This is social re-engineering of your entire workforce, your employees, as well as your vendor relationships that are used to wide open communications and the newest technology and bring your own device and all of those kinds of things are fundamentally flawed in a cybersecurity environment. So you have to be willing also as leadership in a corporation to put in place new policies that might not be universally greeted with applause, and then to give authority to those that have to enforce them so that they've got a little bit of meat behind them and maybe even some automation.
Yeah, great advice, David.
I would just say, keep in mind, everybody thinks about cybersecurity risk as a very complex, very challenging world. Think about the adversary. Think about people that get up every day trying to take what you have. That's exactly how it works. It's why banks have vaults and guards and cameras, and Target has some cameras maybe, but they don't have vaults. The reason is that banks understand very clearly there are people out there that will rob them. It gets back to the adversary. Think about every day while you're working hard to grow your business, develop your intellectual property, somebody else is thinking about how can I steal that from you and monetize it. That'll tell you what direction you should go with your business model.
If I could just integrate what both of you all said, I think that it is the truth that somebody is, millions of people are out there every day trying to take what you have. And at the same time, we have a generation of people who have been raised to share everything they have, at least my sons, way too much on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, etc. So we're growing a generation of people who put everything out there, and they come into the workforce, and we have to teach them to keep everything close to the vest. I think that's one of the biggest social engineering issues we're going to have over the next 10 years.
I often tell the story about the young FBI agents who are brilliant that come and are still working in cybersecurity in the FBI, and you tell them no thumb drives, no social media, no connecting to the internet. Now it's easy to do in the FBI because the FBI defends democracy, they don't practice it. But
So there's that.
right? So it's harder to do in the corporate world. But I think back to Zan's point, if I could say nothing else, I would say this. It's a complex problem. There are some simple solutions that get back to governance, that get back to good cyber hygiene. It gets back to access management. Who am I going to let have access to the data? Not who wants to have access, who needs to have access. What decisions am I going to make about you can't plug this into, you can't plug your iPhone into the system because this is connected to the work you do, which is connected to the paycheck you get. So I would say, to echo everything, sometimes we have to look at it from the government's point of view.
Excellent. And just please join me in thanking our panel, and thank you all for your service, too.